Is it crazy to think that we're going on nearly 2 years now, almost, since Lewis Hamilton won his last race?
Yeah, that is insane. I mean, if you'd said, I mean, that's the crazy thing. Abu Dhabi, when he lost that championship, if you'd said Lewis Hamilton, the last race was Saudi, he won't win for 2 more years after that, it would have seemed him.
Nobody would have bought. Yeah,
and in that time, technically, Max has won 3 titles.
Yeah,
so he won 21, obviously, after Lewis' final win. And 22, and now 23.
Someone pointed this out as well. If you'd gone back to the 2013, I think it was the Spanish Grand Prix that Fernando Alonso won. If you'd said, by the way, Fernando's not winning for another 10 years, can you imagine what that would have felt like at the time? But it shows you how quickly things can turn around. I'm convinced Lewis is going to win again, but the way things are in Formula One, he might not, and that is crazy to think.
With Lewis, is it a Lewis thing? Is it a Mercedes thing with the car? Is it a combination, a little bit of both? What has it been?
Well, I mean, the reason he's not winning, it is the car. Like, if you put Lewis in a Red Bull, I mean, I'm not saying...
We had this conversation last night, yelling at each other over the music at the bar.
That's right. Yeah. I wonder what you guys were doing at that point.
We were preparing for this.
Yeah.
Nice.
So while you were going down the slide.
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
hula hooping.
I was definitely having the better time at that
B-roll
point.
of hula hooping.
Yeah, we have videos.
Yeah. Continue.
Where was I? I just can't think of anything else than
Lewis Hamilton.
So you know, if you put Lewis,
car,
if you put Lewis in a Red Bull, or let's say all of a sudden Mercedes are at Red Bull's level, then of course he's going to win races. So it's definitely a Mercedes thing. But you do wonder with Lewis. You know, I mean, Qatar was maybe a bit of a one-off example, but that's not the kind of mistake you usually see Lewis make. You know, where we really did cut across his teammate. He's usually a very fair racer, gives space, and there's been a few kind of like little lapses, and I do wonder whether it's just the frustration of not having the car capable of going there and winning, which he's had for so long, all those years of dominance, and then it's kind of been taken away. And yeah, I do wonder whether that's got to him a little bit.
Tell me a little bit what you guys are reading. You guys are in the paddock. You guys have your sources. What does it feel like with Mercedes? It feels like there's some tension there, and that the pressure has ramped up. We saw it culminate with that first lap incident. Then we saw the PR machine kick in, and Mercedes tweet out the video of Lewis Hamilton apologizing. He took accountability for it, but it feels like you have Russell, who is very eager to go into that next phase of his career, which is potentially contending to be a champion. And you have Lewis Hamilton, who is very much not wanting to be put out into the pasture of his career. Nico Rosberg, who has been at the midst of that, has been out publicly and said that Russell needs to assert himself more. What's your read right now internally? What's going on with Mercedes?
It's a bit of deja vu, I think, a little bit to Lewis's first season at McLaren with Fernando, and you get this every so often when you put a great driver with a very promising young driver. And just to quickly flip it back to Red Bull, one of the things that, as much as Perez's situation is a headache, they've not had to deal with their drivers crashing out of races and taking points off each other. They've got a driver who's losing points, but he's not costing the team points with both drivers. Mercedes have a completely different problem, maybe a good problem to have. I think it's one McLaren will end up having, where you have 2 drivers who are convinced they're better than the other one. You have Lewis, who, as I agree with what Lawrence said, you know, I think we have seen some maybe cracks in Lewis's armour, you know, over the past year or so, just from that pressure and that frustration of not being where he wants to be. Russell clearly thinks he's a future world champion. I agree if he gets the car in the right place. So that together is a really difficult thing to manage. And, you know, Lando and Oscar Piastri, I think, you know, if McLaren keep going well, eventually they're going to go into a corner at the same time and want the same bit of road, and we know what happens there. So I think there is tension. I do think that Lewis and George, there's a fundamental respect of each other there at the moment, that we saw Lewis go and apologise to George after the incident in Qatar.
How quick can that go sideways?
It can go sideways really quickly, and I think the key ingredient at the moment is they're not fighting for a championship. As soon as you put that in there, as soon as you have Lewis v George and Red Bull, but there's a championship at stake, I think all that stuff goes out the window, because ultimately, as much as these guys are teammates, they're all drivers who want to win the championship, and that, I think, supersedes everything else.
No windows in Formula. It'd go out like a visor tear off. You know? What's your take on Mercedes?
No, that's right. So it's if there was a championship at stake, I think we'd have a very different vibe between those 2 drivers. But fair play to Mercedes for doing that, because not every team will put 2 top-level drivers in together, and you know, and that's very much a decision that gets made at the top, and it kind of almost creates a vibe around the whole team and what they want to do with themselves. I think the other thing that Mercedes have struggled with is that for years they had this no blame culture. So if something went wrong, they didn't blame the person, they blamed the issue, and they found out how to get around it and
that's
how
no
to
fun.
engineer their way out of it.
Not from our perspective.
But it's very easy to do when you're winning. You know, when you're winning championship after championship, it's very easy to blame the issue and not the person. But then all of a sudden, when you are a sizable chunk off Red Bull, a team which only 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that they were fighting for championships with. There's a lot more pressure, and the vibe does change within the team significantly. So it's a real test of that culture to see whether they can come out of it. And the more years they spend in this kind of wilderness, just somewhere in between Red Bull and the rest of the field, I think the more difficulties they're going to have maintaining that.
And managing it is key. Even if you look at Mercedes with Rosberg and Hamilton, that was difficult. You had Horner struggle to deal with the Verstappen-Ricciardo issues, and that obviously eventually led to Ricciardo leaving the team. So it really does complicate things internally, and I think that, again, sorry, I keep bringing this back to Red Bull, but that's where the discussion of Red Bull's second driver is interesting. Red Bull have talked about before getting Lando in there, but I wonder, do they want that? They've got Verstappen in there. We know how Verstappen has kind of treated Perez. He wouldn't even
good
give
enough
him
to win the championship almost.
Yeah,
on his
yeah,
own.
yeah. I wouldn't move over to give Perez fifth position at the Brazilian Grand Prix.
Yeah.
So how's he gonna react to having a very, very good driver or a world class driver alongside him? Sometimes some drivers you just think, look, we don't need that dynamic. So it does come with its flaws, but I think that if that's actually I think it supports Lawrence's point that Mercedes are right up there because they have two drivers who I still think, if you were to strip the car away and just said who are the two best drivers, the best driver pairing on the grid, hard to say that it's not Mercedes right now.
Max Verstappen, he may disagree. He
Well,
came out and he talked about McLaren and what they have. So that takes me perfectly into the question. You guys have been around this sport for a long time. Is this as good of a driver's grid as we have had in the sport going back for a while? It just seems like you look up and down the grid. Look at Williams. You have Alex Albon. We were talking about last night. There's a name that, gosh, I would love to see him in a Red Bull and see what he can do. But up and down the grid, it feels like there's not a lot of weak links out there.
No, there's really not. I think that has been noted this year compared to previous years. There's there were stages when we would look at the teams towards the back of the grid, and this is in the last 10 years, and you'd look at the two drivers, and it would just be the amount of money they could bring into that team and the sponsor they could bring with them. Pastor Maldonado brought money from Venezuela, for example, into the Lotus team when that was struggling, and that incident after incident like that, and while some of those drivers were still very good, and people often bring up the example of Niki Lauda. Well, he was a paid driver when he first came into F1 because he raised money and brought it in, but still, you inevitably end up with lower quality of driver. Whereas now, I think with the success of Formula One, the stability of the teams relative to where they've been previously, they can now go out and pick top talent. And if you look at someone like Logan Sargent, I think Sargent is actually a very good driver compared to other drivers we've had in the last 10 years. He is decent, but he's been shown up a bit, and Williams haven't renewed that contract yet. They haven't confirmed him yet for next year because they do seem to have that flexibility to decide. And if someone like Felipe Drugovich, who won F2 last year when Sargent was racing against him, so beat Sargent to that title, if he can be unlocked from Aston Martin, then he could be a viable option there. So the fact that a seat like that, where previously a team like Williams would probably just be going for whoever could bring the most money, they're now actually sitting back thinking, who's the best quality driver we can put in there?
I'd have to look it up. It's in my phone, but maybe one of you knows it off the top of your head. If Sargent were to be brought back, it would be the first time that we had every driver back, going back, I believe, over a decade plus.
It's not happened in a long time.
No rookies. We were looking that up, and we couldn't. We were really struggling to find one.
People get geared up about silly season and whatnot, but we could have that port over. So answer my question first before I have one more question for y'all. But as strong as the grid's been in a long time.
Completely agree. And to use a different, probably the other driver on the grid who's struggling away from Perez and Sargent, Stroll. Stroll, obviously, if you look
talked about that last night too.
We did. But Stroll, to his defense, there's been points in his career when he has looked okay. There's been flashes from him. The problem is now, I don't think you can be a driver that shows flashes. His issue as well is obviously he's at a team where his dad owns the team. He's come from a lot of money.
A lot of drama there last week too.
Absolutely,
the
but I think
around the Formula One paddock.
But it wouldn't surprise me if you put Stroll into a different series and he was competitive. I don't think it's a case that Stroll is in there. I'm not sure if Stroll deserves to be in the seat he's in. In fact, I say I'm not sure. I don't think he deserves to be in the seat he's in. But that doesn't mean he's a bad driver. And Lawrence is right. There used to be days when we had, Max Chilton and stuff, and you looked and you thought, is this guy really, I mean, led the Indy 500 for a long time when I went to watch that, but I think he's found his level more away from Formula One, and the driver market has actually been fascinating because it feels like it's all simmering to next year and 2026 when obviously there's huge changes, and I think that teams really have an abundance of options at the moment. I mean, even if you look at Haas, they've got Kevin Magnussen, Nico Hulkenberg. Might not be the flashiest driver pairing, but that is a solid lineup now in Formula One, and a lot of teams, 5-10 years ago would have done anything to get that kind of pairing into the team.
The only slight problem now is that it's so hard for rookies to come through and basically get seat time in a Formula One car because we've got so many restrictions on testing. They've opened up first practices a bit, but still it feels like drivers in F2 to really show what they can do. If you look at Lewis before he started at McLaren, he got more testing mileage I think any other driver previously because testing was pretty much unlimited back then, and so that does create a bit of a barrier, which I think is why we have some of these slightly older drivers. But with that does come a certain quality and standard, and it's definitely up there.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube, and for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.